The objective of the W3C is to bring the web to its full potential, which means that the web is the open mechanism for people to share information, to use for commerce and for entertainment. W3C gets its authority to be the driver of technical standards from the web, I would say from three sources. First and foremost, it was founded by the inventor of the web, Tim Berners-Lee, who created an open architecture and asked the industry through W3C to continue to develop and enhance an open architecture. Our second source of authority is from our membership. With well over 300 members, we have most of the key participants in the IT industry, in the web industry, participating in the conversations already. And I think the third source of authority is a track record of success. There was a recent Boston Globe article of the 150 most important things that MIT has ever developed for the world. W3C was listed as the most important of the 150.
I believe standard is the only solution, because only standard bring us good balance of cooperation and competition.
They're the shepherds of the specifications.
Standards are only good if there are many participants.
W3C is like an open place where people can really work together on open standards that everybody can use.
Meeting different parties and different interests to see what kind of ideas they have.
There is enormous value for companies to participate, to provide their use cases, their requirements, and to make sure that they're also learning from W3C what is the next generation standard, so that way they could be at the forefront of implementing that for their customers.
W3C helps us in getting time to market because it opens up the innovation for applications and services.
The way that we make it happen is as a convener. We bring the different industries together. We make sure they're having the right technical conversations. And based on that, we'll set up working groups which will define the technical standards that are necessary to provide the best possible experience.
Web and TV convergence is happening now. This workshop that I'm attending right now is actually telling me that for the first time TV and web people are getting together and actually actively trying to resolve the differences in technologies.
I think HTML5 is just one way to go forward, to move forward, and maybe the W3C with this working group will just set the standard for the TV, bringing HTML5 also into the entertainment sector.
You really have to keep your ears open the whole time, because very important things could pop up at any minute.
By understanding what's important to other people, then you can work out what the path forward is that works well for everybody.
We think that the role of the W3C really is to help the ecosystem. Lacking some group like the W3C to help provide a pan-industry application platform, we think what will happen is you'll see fragmentation in the space.
When you consider how much companies invest in R&D, the small investment to be part of the conversation in W3C is justified.
Because every time there is a new standard which comes from a big organization like the W3C, it means less specific development for us. So every time we can contribute to a standard, actually we save money down the road.
The key is working in partnership with W3C, with the requirements that are coming from this interest group.
The more we can have lots of different content providers, lots of different content, lots of different services, we think the more valuable an aggregator becomes. And you need a platform like the work that W3C provides with HTML and the related standards to have that broad ecosystem be healthy.
Who will actively join this convergence will have chance, opportunity to win. But who will not join this activity will lose.
You can never be sure that all of your requirements will be satisfied until you actually become involved yourself.
W3C has been very, very successful in creating one of the most important standards ever
So the web.
So one of the beauty of W3C that everybody can be involved. Everybody can contribute to shape the future of web technologies.
As much as the web has transformed every single industry over the past 20 years, the new open web platform that we're creating, based on HTML5 with rich multimedia and accessibility by all sorts of devices, will transform every single industry once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. No, thank you sincerely for coming here and getting involved, and we appreciate that a lot. We would also appreciate your feedback on the event. We have a survey that's open now that's linked from the website of the event, and it's also, the URL is available on the IRC channel. We have some fun planned for this afternoon. There's a raffle. Adobe has given us 2 copies of CS 5.5, and so at the break we'll be handing those out. There's a big silver bowl here at the podium. You can come up and write your name on a piece of paper during the break, and at the end of the break we'll pick 2 names randomly and we'll hand out those 2 copies of CS 5.5. So thanks to Adobe. Our next speaker, Grant Goodale, is the CEO for a company called Massively Fun that makes HTML5 games. And please welcome Grant, who will be talking about touch events. Thank you very much.
Yep, good. All right. So I'll apologize in advance for my voice. Hopefully this microphone's only transmitting that and not the germs that it currently has, but such is life. So as mentioned, I run a company called Massively Fun. We do games based on open web technologies. We target the web and we target mobile devices as well. And I'm here to talk today a bit about touch events and what you might want to think about in terms of both the platforms you're developing for and some of the gotchas and interesting facets of developing for both mobile and desktop. So touch events are actually sort of broad, and I don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to dive in pretty quickly. I think the 2 things I would hope you would take away, if in fact I talk too long and I can't finish, are number 1, you can write touchware apps that work across a broad array of mobile devices right now. There's a working draft standard already in place. And number 2 is touchware browsers on the desktop are coming quickly. So the time to think about what your touchware application, how it might work on a desktop, how it might work on a laptop, how it might work on a device other than a phone is now, not later. So quick primer for those. Actually, quick show of hands. Who here has actually implemented anything with touch events? Mobile application? OK, small amount. Good. So hopefully this will be useful for everybody. But touch events first appeared in iOS v2. Mobile Safari exported 4 different events. Whenever I put my finger down on the screen, I get a touch start event for the DOM element that touch occurred on top of. As I move my finger around, that element will receive touch move events. And when I lift my finger off of the screen over an element, that element will receive a touch end event. Touch cancel handles a couple of sort of I won't say corner cases, but rarer cases where things like the mobile OS displays a modal on top of your web page and touch input is canceled. So we had 4 basic events. The event object that you're handed has a couple of arrays of objects. The touches array contains every single touch point that's currently active on the device. Target touches contains the list of touches that are actually active within the DOM element that is receiving the event. And change touches, depending on start, move, or end, receives the list of touches that have been activated or put down during that event, moved during that event, or removed during that event, respectively. And then, of course, modifier keys like Shift, Alt, etc. Each touch object in those arrays contains a unique identifier identifying the touch. It contains the client XY and page XY, which are the relative to the document excluding and including scroll offset, respectively, the XY of that touch in pixels, and then the screen XY for the actual position of the touch relative to the screen. So that whole interface was picked up and formed the foundation for the current W3C working draft. It's actually survived largely intact. There are still a lot of additional pieces of functionality vendors include, a short but by no means complete list. Both Firefox and on the desktop and BlackBerry on mobile support touch enter and touch leave events. So as touches move across DOM element boundaries, they'll receive touch enter and leave events to indicate the motion of the touch across those edges. Mobile Safari, in addition to touch, which is more of a physical interface event, provides an entire gestural interface event that bundles up those touch points into gesture start, gesture change, and gesture end. Those are not included in the W3 spec, but are available on Mobile Safari and upcoming in a slightly different form in IE10 as well. So that gives you additional information, things like the scale of the gesture changing. It will give you things like the rotation clockwise or counterclockwise of the gesture. And then Microsoft for IE10 has implemented a separate parallel set of events called MS Pointer Up Down Move and MS Gesture Start End, which parallel the touch events but are not available under the same name. So you would actually implement separate handlers for MS Pointer Up Down. And the rationale is that there are going to be a lot of things interacting with touch screens beyond simply fingers. And so as I understand it, the MS Pointer set of events are intended to kind of abstract away what's doing the touching and instead provide a common interface for handling contact points, one or multiple contact points on a screen. So here's the big graph, thank you, caniuse.com. For those who can't read the text, that giant blob of red on the left is all of the versions of desktop browsers that don't currently support touch events. It's most of them. So the one green column there is Firefox, which has supported W3C style touch events since Firefox 6, and Firefox 4 and 5 supported a non-standard interface. The good news is, over on the right of that diagram, you can see that there are a ton of deployed devices that run these mobile browsers that support W3C style touch events today. So that includes Opera Mobile, iOS, Mobile Safari on iOS, and Android. So there's plenty of devices out there to develop your touch events or touch applications for now. So what are you targeting? You want to go build a touch event. You're probably not targeting this, since it's about 30 years old at this point. But are you targeting mobile devices? Almost certainly. So what should you be thinking about? Well, number one, native-like behavior. Most vendors' browsers on mobile platforms provide native-style behavior on user interaction. So I swipe my finger across a mobile browser, the page scrolls. I pinch zoom. All the sorts of standard interactions that mobile devices have come to incorporate work on top of your web page. The catch is you may not want them to. You may actually want to implement your own behaviors. So you need to think about how those interact. And I'll go into more detail here in a minute. You'll need to think about devices with alternate input methods. Early Android devices, lots of them had you had BlackBerries with trackballs and touchpads. So there are all these phones that have multiple forms of user input, some of which produce mouse events, some of which produce touch events. And lastly, multi-touch. You almost certainly want multi-touch if you're developing an application, but unfortunately the deployed footprint of multi-touch devices is actually relatively small. It's limited to iOS and Honeycomb. Maybe somebody can correct me. I don't believe Ice Cream Sandwich actually implements multi-touch for Android phones. But so at any rate, if you're doing multi-touch, you actually have a relatively limited set of mobile devices that or a limited set of mobile platforms that your code will work on. So what is there to think about in terms of desktop browsers? Well, obviously limited footprint right now is kind of an issue. You've got Firefox 6, you've got IE10, and then I say no support in WebKit. The good news is that if you watch the commits on Chromium, I'm starting to see some touch-related commits occurring there. So there's a high likelihood that Chrome will incorporate touch events sometime in the relatively near future, although it's not immediately clear when. So you have between those two, here in another 3 to 6 months, maybe a bit longer, you're going to have a pretty sizable desktop browser population that's going to support touch events of one form or another, which is why I say you really need to start thinking about what your touch application might do with when run in a desktop browser as opposed to run on a mobile phone. So OK, I've got actually a little bit more time than I planned. So let's talk about the good bit, which is OK, what should you actually do? So you want to build a cross-platform, multi-touch web app. what are the things, the specific things you should be doing? Number one is you need to, most likely, if it's a mobile device or you need to support mobile devices, you need to disable pan, zoom, scroll, and all the other native things we talked about earlier. So viewport, set your width to device width, set your initial scale to 1, and make sure that the user can't scale by using pinch zoom, and you'll basically fix your viewport to the device viewport, and all of your touch events kind of work the way you'd want them to. Additionally, you'll need to prevent scroll, most likely, on the body of your document by providing a touch move handler that prevents the default behavior, so that you can't actually have your user dragging around the dock. And for the video game folks in the crowd, which is probably not many except for maybe me and the next guy, for the video game folks, this will look familiar. Ordinarily, we think about handling rendering tasks that are event-driven inside the event handler itself. Especially for multi-touch, you may be getting a fairly sizable chunk of events in a short period of time. So if you do your rendering inside the actual event handler, you're not going to see the performance you probably want. Instead, what you want to do is adopt something similar to an animation loop outside of your event handlers, and use the event handlers to populate data, a data structure that is used by that rendering loop or that event loop. So here you can see I'm using set interval on a 15 millisecond delay. Obviously, you'd prefer to use request animation frame. Unfortunately, not quite everywhere yet. And then, in my event listener, I'm actually populating that touches array that's specified up above with the data from the most recent set of touches. So this is going to let me, do my rendering independent of all of the events that happen to be firing as fingers are touching and leaving and moving around. So if, in fact, you want to support more than iOS mobile devices and Honeycomb mobile devices, you're actually going to have to implement single touch support as well. So that means you have to think about what it means to have, what are your fallbacks for your gestural interfaces? If you want to implement rotation using multiple fingers, how does a user with only one finger actually accomplish that? It's definitely an interesting restriction to have to deal with when you start thinking about some of the more complex gestural behaviors. Unfortunately, every single Android phone out there right now supports touch, but supports single touch. There's no multi-touch on them. You're going to need to handle mouse events. So this one's even more interesting because not only do you have to handle mouse events for phones with physical pointer hardware, not only do you have to handle mouse events for phones that don't provide touch events because they're synthesizing mouse events based on touches, and desktop browsers for the same reason, you have to think about what context you're in when you're handling those mouse events. The reason for that is you're looking at multi-touch aware devices that are also synthesizing mouse events. So you have you can't be overly clever and simply have the same handler handle both your mouse click and your touch end, because on a multi-touch device you're going to get both. You're actually going to get a synthesizer. Well, on most platforms, you'll get both. In fact, on some platforms, mouse events fire synchronously in lockstep with the touch events. You may get lots of mouse events. So you can't simply expect to have the same handler handle both events, or you'll start getting things twice or multiple times. So you actually have to do a bit of feature detection and detect whether you've got devices that are touch aware and handle those appropriately. And even more so, you actually have to stop handling mouse events once you're in the middle of handling touch events, so that you don't wind up having these double fires. And lastly, it's time to start thinking about desktop. So Firefox luckily supports the standard events. So you're pretty much ready to go as soon as you have a device that has both a touchscreen and the ability to run Firefox Desktop. IE10 has the brand new MS Pointer and MS Gesture interfaces, which are somewhat different. They are I don't think they're any more difficult to handle than the standard, but you do actually have to do some platform detection in order to figure out what you need to support. So, all right, and I see I have 2 minutes left for questions. Thank you. Question? All right, I guess that's it. Thanks.